Good.
17th, and then the general election for the Jacksonville candidates is May 19th. And just a reminder that the early voting is going on at the Beaches Branch Library, which is why we're meeting in the chapel tonight. And we want to thank Chris Hoffman, who's the executive director of the Beaches Museum and History Park, for allowing Beaches Watch to meet here again, which this is maybe the third time that we've been able to have a function here, so we really appreciate that. And I want to remind you, if you haven't voted and if you haven't made up your mind as to who you want to vote for, Beaches Watch has done quite a bit of work this election season to get some information from the candidates for you so that you can learn more about the candidates and make an informed decision before you vote. You can go to our website. You will be able to find links to the candidates' websites and a questionnaire that Beaches Watch sent the candidates with questions about issues that are important to Beaches voters. And so you can see the responses that the candidates provided. And then also we've had 2 candidate forums, and so you can see the videos for those 2 candidate forums. The first one being the mayor and sheriff candidate forum, and the second one being the at-large city council candidates. And both of those are on our YouTube channel and also on our website. Then just a nice little reminder that Dancing in the Streets is coming up on May 16th. That's always a fun event here at the beach. And then our next meeting, our June meeting, will be Wednesday, June 3rd. We don't have the speaker and topic finalized yet, but we will send out an email when we do. So are there any announcements before we... Chris, you have an announcement.
I just wanted to announce that finally, after a long time coming, the O Striker McCormick House is going to be moving on Tuesday. So you guys are literally the first to hear. Sam is on our board, and you probably just heard it today, didn't you? Yeah. So we just need like one more stamp, but we're going to make the official announcement tomorrow. So it'll be Tuesday afternoon. If you want, when you walk out of the chapel, you'll see the stakes over on the right where it's going to be going. And also just housekeeping, if you need to use the facilities, they're in the little foreman's house across the way. The steps are cordoned off because we've done some work on that, but you can take the ramp up, and if you need help, Josh, another our extra crew, I'll show you that.
Awesome, that's great. One other thing too, if you aren't on our email list, we do have a sign-up sheet at the table where you came in, and you can sign up to be on our email list. We do send out emails letting you know about what meetings what speakers we're going to have, when our next meeting will be, when we have forums scheduled, or things like that. So, and when there are important issues that you need to know about. So, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Scott Shine, who is our new District 2 School Board Representative for the Duval County Schools. And he's here to give us an update on how things are going and to answer any questions that you guys may have.
Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. Maybe we can just set that there. Thank you for the invitation, and thanks for setting this up, Ms. Hoffman, this lovely building. I was thinking this might be a plan on the part of my mother-in-law to get me to spend more time in church. So I need to be marked down as present in church today. It's interesting, school board, I'm going to talk a little bit about governance and how we are structured as a governmental body. I know a lot of folks here are very interested in civics and how we're structured. The school board is a legislative body. In fact, we're state constitutional officers, just like state legislators. But in Duval County, we're also part of the consolidated county government. So we're very unique in the county structure, but we're also unique in the state because we have those dual roles. When you look at a school board, we don't have the opportunity to simply make, like Ms. Hoffman on the city council, or Bill Gulliford on the Jacksonville City Council. They can simply make and enact laws on their own. And some of those laws may be subject to review by the mayor. They can be vetoed. And some of them cannot. They have complete jurisdiction to make law. For the most part, everything the school board has to be agreed to by the superintendent and the school board simultaneously. In fact, we have the two sides of the house. In the school board, we're responsible for transportation, capital improvement, schools, the building. We're responsible for finance and the budget. Superintendent is responsible primarily for curriculum. In fact, in issues dealing with curriculum, the superintendent actually has to put an item on the agenda before we can consider it. So it's almost like a reverse veto. If the superintendent has an issue dealing with curriculum and he does not want to bring that forward, even if we ask him, he simply doesn't put it on the agenda, and it never moves forward. So it's much more like a partnership. Both sides of the house have to agree. If both sides of the house don't agree, generally nothing happens. We're kind of unique in the state of Florida. Like most of the large school systems, we appoint our superintendent, we hire him. But in most of the counties that are small, the rural counties, their superintendent is elected. So when you go into the Florida statute, you see two sets of rules, those for the school board and those for the superintendent. He's elected or appointed. So the day we put the superintendent into his job, I hire him, and we can fire him. But the day he takes that job, he has the same power as an elected official. So that's something that's very different about school board. It's designed to force a collegial body and a body that gets along. We also can't have things happen like we just saw in the legislature where we decide to do nothing. We're just going to stop the wheels of government. With a school, that's just not practical, because in the school system you can't stop classes, you can't stop testing, you can't stop your transportation system. It has to keep going or the results will be catastrophic. On the other hand, what this does is it creates an environment, and this is pretty much nationwide, where superintendents are generally not in a school system very long. The average, from what I understand, is about 2 to 3 years. So that does a couple of things. There's not a lot of accountability, because if you're only in a system a couple of years, are your reforms and activities really going to be measured? The other thing is that it puts a lot of pressure on superintendents to perform quickly. And when I was a kid, I worked with my uncle who was a carpenter, and he had an expression that said, you can hurry up and you can mess it up. And one of the things I see within our own system, we're so driven to make change and make change quickly, we sometimes run over the good things that we're already doing. And we're digging up good work, assuming everything has to change and everything is a problem. And let me say this about Duval County Schools. When you look at our school system, we have a good school system. We have good schools. We do because we have excellent teachers, we have good parents, and we have good kids. What we have that other counties surrounding us don't have are unique challenges. And you'll find this across the United States. Every school system you can correlate by zip code or by geography the relationship between school grades and socioeconomics, one being income. So if you have low income or poverty areas, you generally don't see those areas perform on the same academic level that you do high income areas. So we are in what's called District 2. It runs roughly from South Side all the way out to the beach. We have 19 schools. The schools in our district perform on a very high level. In fact, if you took our district and carved it out and you called it a county, I sometimes like to joke and say you could call it Ocean County. And if you compared it to the rest of the state, you would find it to be one of the best county school systems in the state. It's interesting too, if you look at the relationship between the zip code, you'll find that there's generally a positive correlation throughout the county, with the exception of 2 zip codes. Anybody got an idea what areas that might be? It's basically lower income areas that produce higher academic scores. Belongs to basically Naval Station Mayport, Naval Station Jax. So these are young people, young families, but you can see there's a different state of mind component that makes that work. Okay, now switch gears. I'm going to talk about a couple of very different things tonight. One is the budget, and we are in the budget cycle right now. We have a $1.7 billion budget That's almost twice what the city of Jacksonville has as a budget, but they're catching up pretty quick. That's probably not good news. We're funded by 3 different sources. State and federal make up about 60%, a little bit more towards the state side than the federal. About 1/3 of the money comes from the ad valorem tax. There's some positive news in this. Of course, school funding and money for education is important. We can always use more of it. Whether or not you believe what you're hearing out of Tallahassee, if you look at by inflation, we're actually down in our per student spending, although it's coming back up. But some good news is that since the real estate market is coming up, and that's the basis for our ad valorem taxes, our local tax component should be increasing. And you think, well, a lot of that's capped, homestead, but then a whole lot of it is not. Rental property, that can go up as much as 10% per year, and a lot of those are, because real estate values are coming up profoundly. So there's good news in that right now, and this is one of the things that struck me, is that, of course, you all know that Tallahassee just shut down. They haven't produced a budget yet. So we're not real clear on how much revenue we're going to get from the state or what's going to happen with that. In fact, one of the things I'm working on in the school system today, and I come from a business background, is to look at projections and have a better understanding of where and what our income levels, revenue levels are going to look like year to year. The culture within the school system, and I was surprised to learn this when I got in there, is we really don't look 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road and try to assess what are these revenue sources going to look like. And I guess a forecast. A lot of people are afraid of forecasts. Like yesterday it wasn't supposed to rain. It rained at my house. So no forecast is 100%. But we're really not planning like we should to deal with, so we start looking at the budget. We start looking at how we're going to spend our money and what we're going to do. And we look at next year now. And right now we won't have this finalized until summer. And we're starting school a few weeks later. So it makes me very nervous, but that's how it is. So hopefully we're going to see some changes in that. When we talk about taxes, one of the things that also concerns me, right now we have the lowest ad valorem by law in Duval County for the school share of that. The state says you actually have to collect a certain amount of money to contribute to your school system. With property taxes, if you look at property taxes, you get a lot of argument about this, but we actually have high property taxes in Duval County. In Jacksonville Beach, they're quite high. If you go right across the St. Johns County line, they're a good bit lower. So we're creating an environment in the county that does two things that kind of hurt us. Since we have a higher property tax environment, that does tend to create a certain elasticity where people who are looking for a home, especially young parents, look for a home across the St. Johns County line, or now Nassau. Nassau has seen a significant increase in the last couple of years. So that's bad in terms of the pool of students we have in the county, because we lose those who have the option to spend more money, buy a big house in St. Johns County, drive further to work, are typically the kind of families that students with high academic performance are going to come from. On the other side, since our property taxes are getting higher, and this is another thing we need to look at as a city, what is the elasticity of that? Where are we going to get to a point where we really start to break the back of the taxpayer, and they really are going to, in droves, look to other counties to go to? How much can you get out of it? Well, this is one of the sources of revenue that we look for. So if we ever do need to raise more money, how do we get that money? So it's interesting, your Councilman Bill Gulliford has talked about a sales tax to deal with the pension. That's something I'm very glad to hear. I've written a position paper on it. So I think in terms of solving the pension problem, to stay away from the property tax base, because we need to preserve that if we ever do need to go in and have a property tax increase for schools. So that's a lot of inside baseball that probably wasn't real exciting, but it's something you need to know about. This is something that's come up recently. A lot of folks, you've probably heard about charter schools, and what is a charter school? A charter school is a private entity, it's a nonprofit that builds and operates a public school under the jurisdiction of the school board. It was a law created, I think the law now is almost 20 years old. So the role of the school board is to evaluate their application and determine whether or not they can open. There's a number of these now in Duval County. Duval Charter, you may see the ads on television. A lot of the charter schools actually specialize in programs for kids who have special needs. We have one called Lone Star. They deal with children who have aged out of the system. So there will be 18, 19, 20. Well, many of them are already out of the program. This Lone Star brings them back in and tries to get a high school diploma for them. The problem with this is that we were just presented with some data on the budget that because of the growth in charters and the number of students coming out of the public school system and going into charters, and we basically how we develop a budget is each school looks at how many students they expect to have. We take that number, go to the state and say that here's what we need for the upcoming year. That's our allocation. It's a little bit oversimplified, but that's how it works. So what we're doing right now is looking at, well, how many are going to be going to charter schools? That's going to create about a $10 million deficit in our system. And the problem is if you go and say, well, where have we gone with charters? Where are we going? That number looks like about 50 million over the next couple of years. And the reason being is that we have a lot of fixed costs in our system. So we simply take 4 or 5 students out of Fletcher, 4 or 5 out of Atlantic Coast, 4 or 5 out of Seabreeze. Well, what's happening is there's not a lot we can really change in terms of our cost model because this is spread all over the place. What happens is we still have to have pretty much the same number of teachers. You still have to air condition the building, heat the building, mow the lawn, and there's not an offset there. Now, we have a very pro-charter legislature, governor, Board of Education, and this is something, I'm just going to put this out to you. This may be the kind of thing that would require us to, at some point, increase taxes to cover it, and that's an issue. They tell us, and I'm not against charter schools, I'm not for charter schools, it's just part of the landscape that we have to manage. But what I have a problem with in this whole conversation is they operate by a completely different set of rules. So right now, over on the other side of the ditch, we have Chetts Creek, one of the top schools in the state, and I think they're close to 130% of capacity. I'd love to go down the street and open a school, maybe a special school, in the old Winn-Dixie. That's not going to happen because I can't do that, because the rules say I can't. But charter school, they can do that, and I'm pretty certain somebody is. So it's not a level playing field. All right, let's talk a little bit about school grades. Talk about some things that are kind of a bummer. So let's talk about some good things, some fun things about how we're doing with education. And we're making progress, especially at the beach. Out here at the beach, basically the whole district, we have what I call high-class problems. The difference, our problems are not how many F schools we have, but those that hit a B or a C for an isolated period. For the most part, of the 19 schools that we have, they're all A's. And those that we saw drop down into the B category, Addis Park, which is a pretty small school, Kernan Middle, Landmark, Neptune Beach, and Mayport Middle. Now this is interesting. We went back and asked why, especially Mayport, Neptune Beach, why did we have some scores fall? Other than socioeconomics, the biggest predictor of why a student will excel is the teacher in the classroom. And we also know the longer a teacher is in the classroom, the better they perform. It's not a job you can learn easily in a year. In fact, it really takes about 5 years to get there. And there's a couple of dynamics there. One is we lose generally about half or more of teachers in 5 years. So if you can make it 5 years, you're probably pretty good at it, or at least you're pretty patient and tolerant. You learn techniques and you learn things that a textbook obviously can't teach you. So teachers who had been in the system will perform better. So with these schools, we had a couple of several untoward events. We had some teachers retired. I understand we had some teachers pass away. We also had teachers who left to go to the Quality Education for All initiative. And this is a philanthropic movement in the city where folks like Wayne Weaver and others have donated millions of dollars to pay high-performing teachers to go to what we call transformational schools schools in the inner city. Basically, our schools at the bottom of the performance measure. So that has caused some high-performing schools to fall out here. Good news out of Fletcher. We hit a 91% graduation rate. I think the last score we had was 88, and that's outstanding. You look at the magnet schools, they're generally about 100% graduation, but nobody else really comes that close. In the district, we also had Atlantic Coast. I think they were at 87, and let's see here. And Sandalwood, which was also up, I think it hit 82 this year. Now, one of the things that's interesting, we looked at some numbers with magnet schools because we know that's a factor. We have a 100% graduation rate. Almost every student who stays in magnet school is an A student. Fletcher only has, it's the lowest school, high school in the county in terms of per capita, the feeder pattern contributing to an academic magnet. So in other words, people, if they're in the Fletcher feeder pattern, they don't need to go to a magnet. Very, very few. In fact, everybody knows Fletcher is the school people cheat, use on their address. They use the address of their condo to get into. And so that's a good thing. That tells you that it's not only the academic performance of Fletcher, but there's a connection and a level of trust that people have developed. And there's folks here who are educators at Fletcher, and I salute you for what you're doing, because it is a unique program in terms of its community connection as well as its academic performance. Now in the district, we also have Atlantic Coast. About 25% of the kids in the district, and that's a lot of kids over in the Hodges Road area, Beach Boulevard area, all the kids in Tamaya will be going to Atlantic Coast. About 10% of that feeder pattern goes to an academic magnet. Sandalwood, about 13%. Sandalwood is the highest high school in the county per capita based on the statistics we recently developed, where kids will go to a magnet. Now what's interesting is Fletcher's the best, it is. But what happens if you take about 10% of that feeder pattern for Sandalwood or an Atlantic Coast, if you put it back in, you'll find these schools are almost the same in terms of their academic performance. So I bring that up because a lot of what happens when we look at statistics is that in education, a lot of times it's not what we're measuring, but who we're measuring. So we always say, oh, these are good schools. These are good teachers. Yeah, they are. But what's happening is you're measuring a different student body. We have F schools in this county that have A students. Students that are going to be doctors and lawyers and teachers and school board reps and activists, and that's because they have a level of motivation to get there. So lots of good news at the beach. And last, I want to talk a little bit about, one of the things I do want to talk about in terms of the inner city schools, and a thing I have seen recently, when you get thrown out, you get expelled. It's your constitutional right to have an education in Florida. So you got to come see me. We have to have a hearing to expel you. And it's kind of interesting, all the things we do that we break, and we bring these kids in. A lot of them are kids that are caught with firearms and other serious violations. What happens with these kids when they go into the detention center, Grand Park, which is an alternative school, Maddie B, is you most always, by the time they get to us, they've been there for a couple months, sometimes for maybe 6 months. Their grades go up. We had a kid who was caught with a gun. He's been in the detention center. We got the report, he had all A's and B's, A beyond parole. And I said to the hearing officer, I said, is this accurate? And she says, yes, he's doing the work at that level. So you can see that even these kids that are in the inner city that are troubled, they've been caught with a firearm, you think, what can be done with that kid? He'll never make it. But you look at that and you say, you know what? They can make it. But what it takes is a compact, protected environment with intensive training. And is that something that from a societal perspective, we would be willing to do? And from a financial perspective, we would be willing to do? I don't know if we could ever get those lines to cross, but it really strikes me that there are not a lot of kids that can't learn and can't get good grades. Real quick on the firearms thing, because you folks are community people, and I think it's important to know. We actually had some, we keep seeing these kids come in on expulsions hearings for firearms, and there's sometimes pictures of the firearm or a description of it. And one day I was looking at one of them, it looked like it was from the First World War. What is this? And we kept seeing basically what I would call junk firearms, like a Jennings 22. It would sell in the pawn shop for less than $50. None of these firearms were $300, $400 firearms that you might find at the end of the mountain. In fact, we don't get a lot of information about where the firearm comes from, because in Florida, if you allow the child to have a firearm, if they get access to your firearm, you've committed a crime. Even though you might have hid it, put it away somewhere, if you didn't do it good enough to keep away from them, you've committed a crime. So they cover up where these firearms are coming from. But some of them, they say they find them on the ground. Some of these pocket pistols that have been dropped, people pick them up. I would imagine some of these have been found just stuffed in a drawer, in a coffee can in the garage. These are what I would call derelict firearms. So, in the community, when we're out talking to people, let them know that when they start talking about guns in schools, we're not finding the Glock 9. We're not finding a $400 firearm. We're finding a $50 firearm. Some of these are as dangerous to the user as they would be to a potential victim. And we're working on that. That's one of the many things we're trying to work on. As you know, you see the news and we do have issues with gun violence in our schools. Last thing I want to talk about before we open up for questions, the Florida assessments, the FSA. This is basically what we refer to in the state as Common Core. I've actually given a couple lectures on this, and it runs, when I just talk about Common Core, it's a 2-hour discussion, so we're going to abbreviate that way down. But what's happened is we've taken the Common Core national concept, and we've modified it in Florida with the help of a company called the American Institute of Research. The modality that we're using in Florida is the same as 3 other states. So this is supposed to be common. But it's not, it's different. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is that I don't know that in a couple of years we're still going to be doing this. And that's not good, because we have changed testing standards so many times. We're driving our teachers nuts with changing the testing standard. I know that, we get it. We don't have direct control over that. That's a state legislative issue and a Board of Education issue. The other thing, and you've seen the technology problems with making this thing work, and we were just talking about that issue. The big issue, the bomb that's going to go off in our backyard, is the first year. What fundamentally this does with the scores is it changes the cut score. So what might have been at grade level under the old FCAT last year for, say, 3rd grade reading or 5th grade reading, that standard will probably look more like what 5th grade, like what 6th grade would be. And when you change the cut scores, long story short, we anticipate that where we might have 50% of kids at grade level today, that report may look like something around 25%. Are people going to understand the statistics and mathematics around this? No, they're not. What you're going to see, in all likelihood, is an article in the newspaper. School grades drop 50% under new assessment. And people will be looking for my head. But I'm ready for it. Some of the other nuances about this is that any test has certain biases. So when we look at grading teachers, grading students, or grading schools, the best way to do that is to look at, well, what's your benchmark? Where were you this year, and where did you go forward? Some of the measures look at this, although there's controversy surrounding them, like the value-added model, the VAM model. That does look at some of that. We've lost our baseline, so we don't do FCAT. Now we're doing a new thing. It's not tested, and we're going to apply it to student performance in some ways. So here's what we know today. This is always changing, but 3rd grade is a place where we look at whether or not students should be moving forward. So we're going to take, I think it's 3rd grade reading, and how the state is going to establish what is a passing grade is to simply say, well, in general, 20% didn't pass the old FCAT. So now we're going to take that 20%, and if you're at the bottom of the ranking in the new FSA, you don't pass third grade. Unless you did, and there's a whole litany of other things. You can go to summer school, certain other assessments, and it's like a Chinese menu to get them to go forward. But the thing is, what if we really did great, this year, and maybe only 15% of kids really didn't hit the level? Doesn't matter, we're going to hold it at 20. And the other thing is, maybe we didn't do that good. Maybe there are more kids that should be held back or put in that category. So we're doing this to a degree that some people would call arbitrary. And with our own system in Duval County, and another thing that I'm really pushing, people will tell you we're data-driven. It's great. But that tells me what happened. It doesn't tell me what to do. It's the difference between an autopsy and a diagnosis. So my position is to push analysis. We really got to get smarter about analysis. And again, when I was working in the corporate environment, we would actually look at measures like this and using advanced statistics and forecasting and modeling, and we would control for these things. And I see things that we did 20 years ago in the school system. It's just not there. It's simply, it's very, there's no elegance in how we look at these things. It's a sledgehammer to knock these things to the system. So, a long story short, we do a lot of great work. We got a lot of challenges. Some of the biggest challenges I think that we have is the climate of change, change for change's sake. Are we doing the right things? Are we simply trying anything to see if it works? And are we not preserving those things within our system that are good things? So there's a lot of things I could tell you, but I'm going to let you up and let you ask questions and take a breath. Yes, sir.
What is the definition or measurement of a graduation rate? Is it 10th graders or seniors? Or?
What we are talking about there is the federal standard, and that's the kids that came in 4 years and graduated on time.
If they left the district, if they went some other place?
I'm sorry, what?
If they're not part of the statistics and if they left the system?
That's a problem when they leave the system and come back in, whether or not they're counted. In fact, this is a very complex issue because one of the things that we see, like we talked about Lone Star earlier, kids who have left the system and come back in, if you really just want to make yourself look good, you wouldn't promote programs like that, like the Bridge. You would never want to keep, because they're already out. So if you bring them back in and they drop out of the system again, you count them twice. Is that true, Ken?
Yeah, also, one of the big problems we have is when a kid moves. Let's say a kid moves to Georgia, and they just get up and go, and they don't tell anybody. And you don't know they go to Georgia. So all of a sudden, John Doe's on your list, and we don't know where he is. And literally, at our school, Joe Reynolds gets on the phone, and he starts making phone calls to uncles, aunts, grandparents. And if you can't find that kid, they go against you because they didn't graduate.
Yeah.
So, and that is a big problem.
It is, and that's a good thing to talk about here because we're doing that and that's important. We also have graduation coaches.
Yeah.
But when we do this, what we're doing, and we should know what we're doing, but when we see some of our increases in graduation numbers, I don't want to say anybody's not doing a good job, but what does that really mean? Because we got better at counting, that we do better in terms of academic performance. We just really counted people better. So, and there's a lot of tricks in the whole thing about how you count, who you count, and in all the statistics. And I come from a statistical background, so I love all this stuff. But I can tell you that you could take these things too far. And sometimes the numbers, when they work against you, and they say, oh, the performance was terrible, like our grades that just came out. It's, oh, the grades dropped. Well, the state changed the cut scores on a lot of these. So an A is not the same as it used to be. A B is not the same as it used to be. In fact, one of the things, talking about that, how we've done that up to this point, is how A, B, C, D, F is stacked. So it looks like this: A, B, C, D, F. And a lot of people don't realize that we really try to we make the A side wide enough, try to get everybody, more people in there. And that is a point of discussion because when we do that, you get into the A category, well, could you get even further? So there's people out there advocating for, we need to change the system so that we have much more division in our scores. And I just want to say this, it reminds me a lot of my son. He's in Atlantic Coast, he's 15. They call it minimum effort, maximum return. So why get a 97 in that class when 91's an A? And sometimes that backfires and he gets really mad. But I gotta tell him, it's like an insurance policy. Maybe a 91's an A, but if you get that 97 and things don't go all that well, plus you're not there to just get over the line. Okay?
Yeah, one of the things, Fletcher's been an A for 2 years, and other schools have too. One of the categories that is graded on is our graduation rate. Well, we're up to 91%. Now, anybody in this room would take 91%. If you got 91% back, you'd say, it's great. But if we don't hit 93% next year, we'll probably go down to a B. Now, are we a B school? No. We just didn't get 93% graduation. And that's going to happen to other schools. So you were just talking about the A's. We're probably going to have a lot of A schools go to B's. And everybody's going to look at that like we dropped. But it's just, we're at 91%. I mean, y'all would take 91% all day long. But that's not what the grade says. You got to make a 2 to 3% increase. And they want 100%. We're not going to have 100%. We're just not. So,
Yes, ma'am.
So are there, in terms of testing, can you explain, are there district assessments and state assessments that are given? And if there are district, I respectfully request that you measure a different way. But anyway, because I get the feeling there are district and then there are state. Is that
Yeah,
right?
we were talking about that before, and Ken was going through all the tests that he has to deal with. And it says we should call it the testing bomb because they're doing it right now. A couple of things are happening. We, as a board and our administrator, we do want to start reducing those tests. The state did have a bill to pass that allows us to reduce some of the testing. Right now, the problem with testing is we've become so married to the idea of assessing everything and establishing performance to that. It's very hard to get it out of the system.
But are there like tests that just Duval gives and then tests that just the state gives, or is everything state mandated?
No, there are things that we're doing.
So-
And we still do, of course, the traditional things that teachers do. Teachers still have autonomy to do
Like,
quizzes and things of that
I'm not
nature.
talking about that, I'm
Right.
talking about like, I hear my kids
High
talk
stakes
about
testing.
the high state, like benchmark. I don't know if benchmark's
Well,
like,
yeah,
but
and
I
it's in the
know.
course, is it not accounted?
yeah, all the core classes, all your,
Yeah.
we have, like in sciences, biology, algebra 1,
Right.
English, there's a humanities. Those core are what we call in Duval County CGAs. Curriculum Guide Assessment. Okay, that's county. That's the district.
Okay.
Okay, now EOC, end of the year course exam, is a state exam. And those are in other classes without electives. So when your child comes home and says, I took a CGA, they're taking a district, Duval County district test that they took a pre-test at the beginning of the year. And really, the CGA, which I'm talking to y'all as a teacher, is for them to see if the teacher is following the curriculum and your child has learned more from day one to day at the end, which is okay. So that's a core, that's a teacher cast. You didn't even get in the cast. How we get, yeah, we get assessed off of those CGAs.
But how often are those CJs given?
Well, I'm taking your steam.
Go ahead.
Okay, they give at the beginning of the first 9 weeks. They tried to do one every 9 weeks, but we didn't have the bandwidth to hold that. So now you get a pre-test about 3 weeks into school, and then we're in them now, May. All these core classes are getting CGAs now that are going to compare and contrast your gains. So that's a district test. EOC is more of a state test. And then throw in ACE exams, AP exams, dual enrollment exams is FCCJ. They're just getting, I got a kid who's gonna take 19 tests the month of May.
That's ridiculous.
So
Now-
those ESP tests are for the student as well as the teacher, because it's a measurement for the teacher.
Yeah.
An EFC test for a seventh grader in civics is compared to a district-written baseline CGA. And to me, you're comparing apples to oranges, and I probably need to cut off now because I
Yeah.
have a
That's a sore subject.
long-standing
Yeah.
email going back and forth with
Teachers.
regard to my particular scores, and I will tell you that I had 100% of my children pass the state EOC with a passing grade of C, B, or A, and the majority of them were Bs and As, yet they did not contribute to my BAM score in an amount that is anywhere near the success of my students. And I better shut up now, or I will not.
No, and let me say this. One of the things that's important about this discussion, I want to hear this feedback. Everybody assumes we're bombarded with, we know everything that's going on. There's 195 schools in our system. We have 145,000 students and teachers, I think we have almost 12,000 employees. When things go on, pick up the phone and call me, because we need to know. In fact, we get this thing, it's called the consent agenda, is what we're going to vote on, like we did in the board meeting last night. Some of these are as long as 700 pages. It's that thick. And I look at these things, I'm going through it, and I think, gosh, I would love for a citizen to call me and say, number 25, you need to look at that and ask questions, because it's just a blur, and it's not within any context. So there's things we need to know. I want to say one thing about the testing. It sounds like we're doing a lot of testing. We are. If you go to the Jacksonville Public Education Fund site, which is a research think tank here at Duval County, there's actually a county-by-county comparison of how much testing is done in each county. And believe it or not, we're kind of in the middle of the pack. In fact, if memory serves correct, we're on the south of the middle. So there are counties that are doing more testing out there. It also shows the amount of time that's allocated to testing. So there is a lot of time in the system going to testing. And and again, one of the things that's happened is that from a societal perspective, we've been driving this. Say we want accountability, we want better schools. It's like I talked about before. One of the things I'm seeing in the system is we're kind of driving over the good things that we've had in the system, and we're assuming everything is wrong when there's probably many things in the system that are just fine. So, Mr. Hall.
Well, yes, because Mr. Chapman, I know that we have to address some budgetary issues. Let's talk about that. A lot of the drain is coming from some areas that are not accountable to the school system, not like the charter schools. They have nothing against the charter schools, but just addressing the budget. Now, how are you going to address that shortfall? I mean,
Well, actually,
inevitably it's going to continue.
yeah. Well, that's an issue. Right now, we don't have a shortfall. We have a balanced budget. We've had one for a couple of years. When Dr. Beatty came in, and Ed Pratt Daniels was here, we had a system which we have a surplus that we identify, a certain percentage of money that we have to keep in the budget. I believe it's 3%. We go below 3%, the state comes in, and essentially it makes mandates in your school. One of the reasons we have that 3% is we really never know how much money the next year we have to either pay back or might get from the state. We recently got, I think it was $30 million, because our models around the teacher allocation and students were more conservative than reality. But if we put together a model and said we need more money, and it's higher, we may have to pay that back. We also have the issue of expenses we may or may not control for. The problem is right now we used to have a very high surplus. We're trickling that down. There's a recommendation on the table now with the charter issue to bring that down to about 5%. That puts us within striking distance of going below our 3%. So we don't know how we're going to handle that, whether or not we're going to take the surplus down. Another thing that makes our system unpredictable is litigation. In any given month, we get a sheet filled with all the workers' comp and other litigation that we have. Some of these are tens of thousands, some are hundreds of thousands of dollars. So those are unexpected things that we have to deal with. So again, we're a $1.7 billion organization and trying to hit this number accurately. The other thing is how our money is allocated, where we can spend money, is highly restricted according to statute. We get certain monies that come in for capital, for building improvements, etc. Money can only be used for that. So it's very narrowly divided around where we can spend money. What's interesting is that when we may have money that's in excess in one of those accounts, frequently we can't move it to something that's even similar because we have to comply with the statute. So we're highly restricted on what we can do within the budget.
Same vein as the budget. When was the last time they shuttered a school in Duval County?
Good question.
My thing would be, if we're going to open charter school, is there anything on the council that would say we're going to shutter a school for each charter? I mean, there's got to be parts of town, although Duval County has grown, there's got to be parts of town where there are schools that are well underused that would be easily, we have transportation. There's places in town where there's old people now, they don't need an elementary school. And the elementary school that's newer and close by, they're going to bus them anyway. I mean, I'm just curious, when was the last time they closed the Duval County school? And could the council do something where they could trade a charter school for another school and not dilute the money?
I would take that as a rhetorical question. Yes, that is an issue, and it's a challenge. People are very emotionally invested in their school. They don't want to close them. And then the school board district representative for those areas, it's not out here. We've got more kids than we know what to do with, and it's a good thing. If you look at, it's interesting too, because if you look at the issue just briefly with school capacity, you think, a lot of parents complain about crowding in a school. The school's 130%. The fact of the matter is that if you go do a correlation, I'm not saying I'm for overcrowded schools, I'm not. Do a correlation between schools that are crowded, the level of capacity at that school, you're going to find a solid, positive correlation. The more kids in the school, even if it's overcrowded, the better academic performances. So, what happens though, when you look at some of these areas in the city, once you get out of the beaches, you start to see the capacity numbers open up. And generally that relationship, when you get into the inner city, we have schools down in the 40s in terms of capacity. The problem there, again, becomes emotional and political, because if you close that school, that district rep is going to have a hard time. So it's easy for me to say we should do that. And I'm saying we should, because the reality...
That's the council side, that's not...
Well, it's a partnership, it's both. But the board is a place that has to really make that commitment, because one, it's our statutory responsibility, and two, that's going to be a sacrifice, for the representatives. But again, if you look at efficiency, the other thing that we've run into is the average age of a facility in our system is, I think, 54 years old now, and we have the dilemma of the maintenance and upkeep on those buildings, and investing in those old buildings versus what it would cost to build a new building. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to do that. That's going to be a bitter pill for people to swallow. In Duval County, we are the top system for homeschooling. We're about halfway to being one of the top schools for charter. I think Miami-Dade is top of the list. They're around 12-15% of their base. We're at 6 or 7. And the trend, if you look at the trend, I've done some numbers on that. The school system hasn't done this. These are my numbers. But if we continue on, we'll be in the same place, and we'll be somewhere around 10-15%, in the next couple of years. Yes, ma'am.
Just a quick comment. This is our 8th city that I've lived in with my kids, and I've taught in several. And things are cyclical. So I've lived in a couple of cities. Seattle and a suburb of Chicago are too, where they shut down a school, knocked it down, or sold it for another use, and then 8-10 years later, population changes, and then they have to raise all this money to build a new school. So it's just it sounds like a great idea sometimes, but it's not. But so I have a question about the budget, like
Sure.
you were saying with that the superintendent kind of controls the agenda.
The agenda, yes.
Right. So let's say if the school board you monitor the budget, and let's say the superintendent or deputy doesn't want to, you use the example of curriculum, he doesn't bring it up. But don't his expenditures have to be approved? So let's say he doesn't bring curriculum, how is he going to have the money to spend on these items? So anything that he gets that's big has to be approved by you.
That's right.
Right.
Well, there's a couple of parts of that. One is that when we approve a budget, the budget essentially becomes law. And he's supposed to stay within that. There are guidelines around what he can do in terms of discretion. Our number right now is $75,000. There have been efforts to reduce that. City Council's 25. I'm not really comfortable with the 75 number. I'd like to see it drop down to 50. And then there's other ways that money gets into the system that the superintendent has access to. For example, there's a thing called the Pepsi Fund. Apparently we had some type of deal with Pepsi to do Pepsi in the, and they gave a fee back to the county, which was then used for, and that kind of money is good if it's used appropriately, because there's certain things we can't use any money for, things like uniforms and
That's what the Pepsi contract.
things like that. So, it's a challenge and how we handle those things, but we do have responsibility for the budget. And this is something we're in the process of clarifying, and one of the things I'm working on. What happens when the superintendent doesn't follow the policy? We can actually sit as a deliberative body, look at the policy, and say, no, you're not following. So send an order that you need to follow the policy. Well, then what? What if he doesn't do it? It's just like your employees in your business. Well, what if they say, well, I'm not doing that? What are you going to do? Well, you can fire them. Sometimes that action may be more egregious than dealing with the reality of defiance. We have something that's unique. We're going to talk about the charter in Duval County. Charter is really complicated, but it was created in part because all the different municipalities and independent authorities back 40, 50 years ago were suing each other and burning up a lot of money and infighting. So within the charter, any entity, school board, JEA, city council, the mayor's office, can be subject of a general counsel's legal opinion. And that legal opinion, when it's made, this is an official thing, it's like a judicial hearing. It is considered legally binding on that employee. So we could, in theory, take it over to the general counsel and say, this is a problem. Is this the policy, and is it being followed? And he could issue an order saying you have to follow it. We need some clarification around that. And ultimately, because of our model, because we're a superintendent-driven system, we can fire the superintendent at any time. So last night we could have someone could have made a motion to fire the superintendent. I hear a second, 4 votes, and in 30 days he cleans out his office. And what's interesting, because we just renewed his contract, there's a lot of controversy around that. But one of the things that was in the contract, and in fact there's a state law that prohibits employment contracts in the state from having to pay out if someone is fired. So he has a 3-year extension, which is the maximum you can give them. So will we have to pay out all 3 years? No, that statute says, I believe it's only 90 days. And if they leave, they get nothing. So one of the things we did, and I was part of making sure this was in the contract, is that it's codified in the contract. So if that law changes during the next 3 years and an untoward incident comes up and we do have to fire the superintendent, we won't be on the hook for any of the paying out his contract for any remaining period. Yes, sir.
Does each one of the students get the same funding no matter what school they go to?
I'm sorry, which students?
Each student, west side, east side, north, south, they all have the same funding per year?
That's what the model does. But what's the expenditure is going to be different. My predecessor, Fel Lee, was working on a project with the Public Education Fund to develop a data lens, in essence, to find out where money is being spent and on which students. So we probably spend a lot less money on students in this area than we do in some other parts of the county. A place we need to spend more money. In fact, let me touch on this because this makes me think about, of all the calls I get, probably one of the most common calls is about children who have minor disabilities, learning disabilities, like dyslexia, attention deficit disorder, sometimes emotional disorders. And we're not effectively dealing with this on many different levels. And one of the reasons we're not effectively dealing with it is because we haven't had the wherewithal as a society to put the funding into it. You take, for example, dyslexia. I come from Richmond, Virginia, the Chesterfield County school system, and I know that in 1972, they were testing for dyslexia because I had that test. They don't even admit that dyslexia is a condition in Florida. That's where we are. That's how far behind we are in that group. And here's what I tell people. I say, you know what, we have good schools here, good teachers. Your kid will get a good education in the Duval County system if he's not that 90% of kids who are okay. They don't have something, an economic problem, a family problem, an emotional problem, a learning disability. That kid goes in the school system, he's going to get a good education. She's going to get a good education. He has dyslexia, attention deficit disorder, and that one may have a problem. And it just depends on where the school is and the teachers that are surrounding them. Now, we've done something that's kind of innovative. We've developed an academy. You talk about closing schools. We kind of closed a school just recently, Justina Road Elementary. It was a school about 40% capacity. It was underutilized. It's an F school. So what we did is we broke that school up. We sent them out to the different schools in the system. They were higher performing schools, so now they're going to, and again, is it higher performing schools or the student body? So, but we're dispersing them out into the other schools in the community. And Justina is going to become the Grasp Academy, which is a school dedicated to kids with dyslexia. And what we're seeing right now is very good results out of this concept. This is something Dr. B brought here, and it was an initiative that he took on. In fact, we had a state legislator, I think out of Palm Beach, come up here a couple of weeks ago to actually tour the school and look at it as a model for legislation that may be put through the state legislature so those kids can get more help. Apparently this is an older lady. She has a granddaughter with dyslexia who's got in the public school system, and they don't know how to deal with that. An interesting story about where we are with kids with disabilities. When my son was in about the second grade, he had a teacher, and interestingly enough, it was the oldest teacher that was in the school, but was one of the most in tune educators, and said, he looks like he might have dyslexia. I recommend that he be tested. So we go through all of that, go to the school system, say, teacher says he needs to be tested, and they tell us, no, he doesn't have an IEP. He hasn't been put in the box yet. The other thing is they really don't have a way to test for dyslexia. In fact, the Grasp Academy is our kids who meet the characteristics of dyslexia. Again, Virginia, 40 years ago, is doing this. We haven't even started in Florida. So there's a place, and this is a place I'm very passionate about because we really lag behind so many other states. And these are kids whose parents want help, kids who want to learn, and they can learn. And some of them are. Some of them are getting the help either in their school or through other methods, and that's another story. My son, we actually have some means. We went to, I think it was Hope Haven. We got the test. We paid for it out of our own pocket. Turns out he didn't have dyslexia. A couple of years later, the school he was at, the PTA test, paid, collected money to have all the kids tested for gifting. So that was another one. So now he got tested for gifting, but he may not have been tested before. He thought he was just learning disabled. In fact, I remember when I went down to get the test, and I was kind of nervous about that. Hey, it's my kid, he's not all that bright. His verbal was 1 in 1,000. His math was like 1 in 750. I thought, man, he's way smarter than me. Maybe he should call all the shots. So now he's gifted. Now we get a letter from the school. Oh, we can do something with his dyslexia problem because now he's in the box. Now he's in the program. I'm like, what? This doesn't make any sense. We already knew that wasn't the problem. So that's an area, just a couple other quick examples to get, because it's important. This is important for community activists to know about where are the gaps and where do we need to move forward. We have had some cases, one in particular, where someone filed an ADA lawsuit with the federal government and came back confirmed, and it was in this district. And we've had other kids who have this IEP process, and they get to high school, and I know of one in particular, when they get there, the challenge becomes so high, and they really haven't had the background, and they begin to fail, and they struggle. And then the question of what other disabilities were with this child, and they weren't correctly diagnosed. And then we get to high school, there aren't a lot of programs. In fact, there are no programs for these kids per se. Now you've got trouble. And one of the things with this IEP process, individual education plan, deals with kids who are exceptional in some way. Either they've got a learning disability or even they're gifted. In some schools, this has become a process where it's somewhat perfunctory. We have the plan, we check the boxes, we do these things, and the parents are hearing, well, he's got the IEP and we're following it. Everything's okay. And we find out down the road, no, everything's not okay, because we really didn't address all the problems. If you look at wraparound services, a whole different dimension is where are the kids who get help when they have emotional problems or other issues. We have the wraparound services, the United Way, what do we call that, Kim, out at Fletcher? The
Full service.
The
resource
full
center.
service, yeah, the full service.
Okay, the full service, I think it's called the Resource Center.
Resource center, yeah.
And if you look at where those, they provide mental health services and other services. If you look at who utilizes those services, Fletcher is one of the most utilized locations because a lot of folks who don't have education themselves, a lot of education, a lot of understanding about these issues, the parents either are not engaged enough or they don't recognize these problems in their children, so they don't get put into that track. So it's interesting, where we see this issue being brought up by the parents, there's a lot of parents in communities like this who are engaged, who are educated, and they say, I know my child can learn, but there's something holding them back. So we've got that whole, and remember, this is one of the most common calls I get. So there's other parts of town where there's parents that just don't know, and these kids are not being tested. So I think it's a sad thing that's in our system, and it really comes down to we are putting the resources together to make this happen. Pull me off the stage. You get me fired up, I'll just keep going. Let me go ahead and just wrap up here. It's been great to talk to you tonight. If you need me, please call me. If you see things in the system that we need to know about, please do that. Don't assume that you see something that's broke in the system that somebody's working on. They may not be. So I've got an open door. I'd love to hear from you. If you want to go through that 700-page consent agenda and tell me where to look for the problems, I'd love to hear that. So again, it's been a pleasure to talk with you tonight. I appreciate your interest.
Don't go anywhere.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for coming tonight and for taking the time to speak to us and answer the questions. And if anybody would like to talk to Scott after we adjourn the meeting, feel free to. And just a quick reminder, the next Beaches Watch meeting will be Wednesday, June 3rd. It'll be at the Beaches Branch Library, back in the community room where we normally are. And anything else? Are there any other announcements we need to make before we close for the night? Yes.
Yeah, if, we did our Sea Oak project, and if y'all are walking down Neptune Beach between Seagate and Florida, we only got as far as Florida Boulevard. Mm-hmm. We ran out of Sea Oaks. Mm-hmm. But you'll see little pink flags and big green bamboo, and we are measuring them bi-monthly, so we're going to track them. And we went out the other day, and rainy month, it was good. So, and you know, we thank Jolly, but we thank Beach Watch, because y'all are kind of behind that. And I've already had 3 or 4 people go, we'll buy them next year, we'll buy them next year. So it turned out really good, and the kids are behind it. And I appreciate y'all letting my kids come in, so thanks.
Yes.
Yes, Chris, may I say, what is the Fletcher Schools event?
We have our, thank you, great question, Sam. We have our Fletcher All-Class Block Party on May 30th. It's right out here. You don't have to have gone to Fletcher, but it is a celebration of our island's only high school, and it's a great party. We have food trucks, band, it's a lot of fun. So it's a fundraiser for the museum, but there's more information on our website. It's on May 30th.
What time?
6:30.
Okay, May 30th at 6:30. Okay. All right, well, thank you all for coming tonight, and have a great rest of your month.
You're welcome.